Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our third session of Hearing Soul, guided overview of African American choral traditions. My name is Amanda Weber. There are a number of faces on this screen that are new for me, which is awesome. So if we haven't met, very nice to meet you in this format. Hello. Want to call your attention to the chat function that is at the bottom, probably at the bottom of your Zoom box. That's a really great place throughout the next hour to type in comments or questions as Philip is presenting, and then whenever he wants to kind of pause and go back to those things, we can do that. But it's a good way to kind of get your thoughts out without interrupting. So I will ask you all to stay muted unless we're invited to speak or share something. This session is being recorded, and so we'll be able to share it after the fact with anyone that you maybe hoped would be here who didn't make it on tonight. So I think those are my kind of boring announcements. And now, just very delighted to introduce to you my former classmate and dear friend, Philip Schultz, who it would take the whole hour to list all of Philip's accomplishments. He does so many things, is in a lot of places at once, primarily working with Vocal Essence and with their newer ensemble singers of this age, working with young people making music. And just took a church job at Westwood Lutheran Church, which is very exciting. I don't know if you have any Westwood people on here tonight. And then also does adjunct teaching at St. Thomas University. I'm sure I'm missing other big things, but Philip, why don't you take it away and fill in whatever I've missed?
Oh, we're not going to talk about me tonight. I do want to say thank you to Amanda, to you for inviting me to be a part of this. And more importantly, thank you for having this conversation, for providing a space for this conversation to take place over the next several weeks. I know that these recordings are going to be of use to a lot of people around the country and the world as we begin to rediscover, I'll say, reimagine and learn more about the ways that we can engage with the rich tradition of Black choral expression is how I call it. But before we begin, I want to invite everybody for a moment to stand as you are able. And if you would, if you don't mind turning your screens on for this here, let's just enter into the space here. And I want to make sure you can still see me clearly. In fact, I'm just going to stop the screen share for a moment here so we can see each other. It's important that we take time to enter into this space and acknowledge that we all enter into this space with some form of trauma. We don't even recognize the trauma that's in our lives, the trauma that's in our minds, in our bodies, in our souls. And when we take time to breathe, not only does it lower the toxicity in our bodies, not only does it lower the anxiety, it's also a form of somatic healing. And somatic healing is something that really, really can help us when it comes to trauma. So if you're not able to stand, just sit forward in your chair and just move as much as you can. But I'm just going to invite you to take your hands in this position. I call it the gratitude position. You may know it as the namaste, the light that's within me acknowledges the light in you. And take a moment from there and just exhale out into the space on an SH. Shh. And then breathe back in through your nose. And then exhale it out again. Shh. And one last time in through your nose and out on the SH. And now if you would take your right arm, put the palm to the sky and the left arm palm to the floor, and exhale as you stretch in both directions. Come back to that gratitude position and then reverse it. Now your left arm up, right arm down, stretch and exhale. And finally, back to this position here. And we'll do one final thing just to have a little fun. So you're gonna take your right arm, your left arm, your right arm, your left arm, and then a clap, okay? So we're gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, clap. Got it? Ready? Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, clap. Do it in threes now. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. All right, we're ready to begin. Go ahead and take your seats.
Nice.
Now you're ready. Now you're ready for our time together here. There's so much that we can cover. I love the title, and I was just happy to jump on board with that title, Hearing Soul. As I approached this conversation, I thought, where am I going to begin and how do I want to tackle this? Because an hour is not enough time to really go a lot of places, right? So what I want to do is really have you hearing today. We're going to do a lot of listening, and I've kind of chosen some composers that highlight certain forms of expression in what I will call a term that I borrow from my colleague Marcus Garrett, non-idiomatic expression. So non-idiomatic Black choral music is that is not from the idioms known for Black people: jazz, blues, R&B, gospel, spirituals, right? Hip hop. Those would be idiomatic expressions from the Black community. African forms of music and dance would be idiomatic expressions. So the non-idiomatic expressions, loosely termed, would be classical music. I tend to kind of resist that term because it then puts us in a framework of Western European background. But let's go there for a second, because what some people don't recognize perhaps is that a lot of Black and brown composers have been well versed in Western European music for a long time and write some things that sometimes we don't know who wrote it. We can't tell what they look like, where they're from. And I love that about music. So our first task tonight is to do a little listening. I've got 3 composers and 4 pieces of music, 2 pieces by the first composer. So I probably won't play the whole thing, but give you enough to just take a moment to write down what you hear. You can write down things that come to your mind as far as how you describe the music, the style of the music. If you think you know the composer, write that down too. All right, so here's the first composer, song A. And Amanda, if you just give me a thumbs up to make sure my sound is actually coming through. Oops, it took you there. Do you still see the screen? All right, that gives you a little bit there. I'm gonna go to the next one now. Okay, here's song from composer number 2. I could listen to that all night, but we must go on. Composer number 3. I'm going to skip ahead just for a second so you can hear a little bit of counterpoint. And since we're early in the session, I don't have a problem leaving you hanging there on a half cadence there. So let's talk a little bit here. Let's just talk generally speaking about what you heard in those 3 selections there. And the first one, tell me, Amanda, it changed on me. I didn't realize it was going to, on my screen, it actually went to the composer's SoundCloud site. Did you all see that? Okay, good. I was nervous there. I was like, it just gave it away. So just talk about the 3 pieces together. You can speak specifically about 1, 2, or 3, or just in general. What did you notice similarities, differences in what you heard there compositionally? Unmute yourself and just introduce yourself to the space. We'll just take a couple moments here to see what you have to say. You didn't realize it was going to be participatory, did you? Yeah. If you feel more comfortable typing your thoughts in the chat, that's fine too, and I'll read them out for you. But I would love to invite your voices into the space.
Hi, Philip. This is Mark Stahura.
Hi, Mark.
Number 3 really sounded like a common genre these days, which is more concerned with being pretty than moving. I hate to say it that way, but that's what it struck me anyway.
Okay.
This is Marianne, and I found all of them to be quite lyrical in different ways. There were many layers and textures in each one of the pieces.
A lot of lyricism. Yep, definitely. And textures. Okay. Thank you. It's interesting, Mark, to take your comment of pretty. So what does our association of pretty come from? This is a rhetorical question. You know, what is the context for pretty? Okay. Any other thoughts that you want to share about the 3?
I would actually, I would say, I would say the main one, main takeaway for me is like the first one I found to be in some ways even like kind of have a darker feel, whereas the second one a much brighter feel. But it's like in terms of the mechanic, in terms of like the makeup of the music, it was almost like the second one was the more rhythmic counterpart to the first one, because I found both of them to have a much more deeply rich sort of color profile to them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a much more diverse sort of contrasting colors happening in the first one and the second one. But the first one I found to be a darker, more sort of atmospheric version of the second one. So I enjoyed both.
Thank you much. Jen Vickerman, I saw your hand going up there.
Hey, So really, I heard a lot more rhythmic components in the second piece.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third composer sounded to my ear very John Rutter influenced. For any of us that know John Rutter's choral music, I was hearing a lot of that kind of sound and writing. I'm sure it's not him, but maybe someone that has listened to him a lot.
Interesting. Interesting that you said that there. Okay. So now I'm going to come back out here and play a different piece from two of the composers. And let me make sure I still got you there. And see if it surprises you that the same composer for number one also wrote this piece. And let me get back into the slideshow. There we go. It doesn't like to cooperate if I go that way. There we are. Okay, you got that there. Now, for this third one, I'm going to do a little bit. It may be a giveaway. It may not show on your screen actually here. Do you see me changing screens right now? Perfect. I love this about Zoom. I can hide things. There's a little commercial, and then you'll hear
Riley.
the piece here. So give me 3 seconds.
Riley.
YouTube. All right. This is the composer of the third piece. There you are. So you heard two pieces from composer number one and two pieces from composer number three. And the reason for that is because both of those composers were deeply influenced by composer number two. And I would go so far as to say composer number three doesn't really consider themselves to be a composer. And once you see this now, you'll understand just why. So composer number one is my good friend Brittany Boynton, who's down in Atlanta, Georgia at Spelman College. She went to Westminster Choir College for a master's. She's a pianist and a phenomenal composer and is doing a lot of wonderful work right now. Really versatile. You heard that John 3:16, as you said, is very deep and introspective and evocative of that text of God so loved the world. Adolphus Hailstork is one of the dean composers for those of us who are Black. He has written so many powerful works. He is right now writing a cantata in honor and memory of George Floyd. He was commissioned to do that. He has written a variety of pieces for all kinds of performing forces. And as someone talked about the rhythmic elements in his work, he has this gift of marrying lyricism with great rhythmic intensity. And then myself in there, I don't call myself a composer. So Mark, I have no problems with you saying it seemed like they were being pretty. It was a moment. I wrote that piece in response to my choir not having enough people to sing the Thomas Tallis Onata Lukes that we had learned. So one day I went in my office and just wrote it down, a 3-part setting, so we could sing it that Sunday. And it stuck, and it works well for youth. And then the Rise Up, Shepherd and Follow was also in response to needing something for a Christmas concert. But what I wanted to share with you there is that as a Black musician, we naturally live in multiple spaces. We organically, when we study classical music, we learn it, we invest in it, but we can never divorce ourselves from the heritage and the music that's in our bones and in our genes. So you notice both Brittany and I very easily go back and take a spiritual and can put our own spin on it that has some elements of choral music and the choral tradition, whereas we can also work in a style, as Jen said, mine sounded like John Rutter. Well, I have sung a lot of John Rutter in my day, you know, so there you go. Adolphus Hailstork is one of these legendary composers who is doing this for a living, and it sets the stage for the rest of the conversation tonight, because you have heard this composer before and you've heard this piece. I'll only play 30 seconds of it. You'll know it right from the beginning. Everybody sings Total Praise. Minnesota Chorale and Minnesota Orchestra perform Total Praise. Everybody knows that piece. We go to that piece a lot. You know why? Because Richard Smallwood was trained as a classical pianist. He sings gospel. He's a gospel musician, but all of his music brings in his classical Western European training, and he marries that with the spirit and the soul of the Black church experience. You know, I skipped to the end there. You can hear just a little bit of the stretto section there. That's straight out of classical music, you know. That's common practice stuff that he has in gospel music. And his arrangements, his pieces, compositions are written down, so anyone can perform them. The tenor part lies quite high, but there actually is a version out there that Doreen Rao has done that is very accessible for church choirs. So now, let's talk about some people. Jose Mauricio Nunez Garcia. How many of you know that name? You can see his stats here. One of my favorite composers, born in Rio de Janeiro, Afro-Brazilian, grandson of enslaved Africans. While over 240 of his works have survived, some say he wrote probably twice as many as that in his colony, in a colony of Portugal. And we're beginning to learn more and more about him. He sang beautifully, as it says here. He wrote music. He taught music from the age of 12, which I find to be really fascinating. He also went into the priesthood. In 1791, he requested his ordination in the Catholic faith. So a very versatile composer and musician. And I believe I've got a track of his here. Yeah, let's just listen to a little bit of his work. Think about who this sounds like to you. If that's not, again, classical period straight up. And the thing that's interesting to me is some people would say, oh, he sounds like Mozart. Oh, he sounds like Haydn. And I would say, no, he sounds like Garcia. Maybe Mozart sounds like him. Maybe Haydn sounds like him. It's somewhat our context and our landscape. You know, we orient ourselves to those names that we know and love, and we know why we know those names, right? Because there was a campaign to really make sure the aesthetic practices of Western Europe, in particular Germany, were raised to the highest esteem. So people that we now call musicologists started writing down everything they could to document how their form of music making, their form of living was the highest ideals, right? Okay, there was documentation, and I'm not going to get into the social side of things today, but there's documentation where you have biographers and musicologists and other sociologists writing things about the fact that the darker skinned people were sluggish, seemed more primitive, not as able to handle multiple directions, whereas the fair skinned, blonde headed person is agile and smart. There was a whole campaign, and I don't blame them, because they were trying to really justify their lifestyle at that period in time. The problem is now we know more, and it's up to us to not keep perpetuating those stereotypes that were put into place to serve a particular purpose at a particular point in time. So my point to this is to say we have to be careful moving forward of comparing people like Jose Mucio Nunez Garcia to Mozart. Whereas instead of saying, oh, here's a composer who is of African descent, who lived in the time of Mozart and composed in a way that was similar to, it makes me wonder. You know, it just changes our framework a little bit. The other piece that I put here was the very first piece that he wrote. If I could have written this at age 12, I would be really rich right now. Listen to this, Toda Pourquoi Es. So that gives you a little sample. And for those who know me well in the room, you know that this is the music that makes my heart sing. I went into classical music, and I just use the term, because of this music. Johann Sebastian Bach is the reason I'm in Minnesota to study with Kathy Romy, to be able to work with her, and then Helmut Rilling. I mean, this is the stuff that's I love. I can't get enough of it. And it really does my heart good to know that my ancestors around the world, even back in 1767, which is when Garcia was born, were playing and composing in this way. This is as much the music of the Black experience as is the idiomatic stuff that we've come to know and think about when we think of Black choral music and expression. So I'll move forward now. Margaret Bonds. Many of you probably have heard of Margaret's name, and I'll let you read what's here on the screen. I'm not going to reiterate a lot of that right at this moment here. But what I want to say about Margaret that I find to be interesting is that she was not commissioned for her classical music. Margaret was commissioned to do other things. She wrote a ton of pieces with Langston Hughes, or based on Langston Hughes' text, that have received wide acclaim in the art song world, but she was most known in the vocal world for her spiritual arrangements. And it's kind of a product of her time. She gained that recognition by performing and writing arrangements of spirituals and folk songs from the Black experience, but some of her most profound music is her music that is classical music and that Western European tradition. There are a couple of pieces that have just been rediscovered, and I want to talk about one here a little bit. It's something that I hope to do very soon with one of my choirs for a Christmas concert, and it's the Ballad of the Brown King. I want you to listen to a bit of two movements of this. This is a work for soloist, orchestra, and choir. It's an oratorio.
Of the three wise men who came to the king, one was a brown man, so they sing.
It there for just a moment. It's really just in that minute of listening, you hear the influence of jazz and blues creeping in, as well as the spiritual tradition, but definitely grounded in the practices of Western European music. So this was another one of the works that she collaborated on with Langston Hughes. The text is by Langston. It tells the story of the three wise men, focusing primarily on Balthasar, who we refer to as the Brown King. And it's in 9 movements, and it was premiered in 1954 and had been lost until 2018, and to my knowledge has only been performed 3 times, 2 times in recent memory. And so I'm working on procuring the score from my colleague Malcolm so that we can bring this here to Minneapolis here in the next year. It was going to be this year, but COVID, what do you say? So we're postponing that. Listen to the next movement here, or the third movement here, which is the Sing Alleluia. It's a short a cappella number.
Sing hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah to our King. Sing hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah to our King. Sing hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah to our King. Sing hallelujah,
Short and sweet and delightful, right? We move on. Ulysses K. This is one of my guys. I love Margaret Bonds. I've sung her 3 dream portraits. And Ulysses K is a composer that I'm really into now. And the Vocal Essence friends in the room, you will recognize Ulysses K. You can see some information about him there. Particularly take note of the fact that he was the nephew of a jazz trumpeter. And he plays jazz saxophone, but his music really goes in a different direction. His music, you'll see he studied with Hindemith, so this is going to give it away. It's characterized by melodic lyricism, but a tonal orientation that is supplemented by a lot of chromaticism. So he really doesn't pay attention to key areas. He writes in a neoclassical style from a form standpoint, but his harmonic language is very avant-garde. And so I'd like for you to hear a little bit of his Alleluia. And this is a performance that I did with a 9th and 10th grade all-state choir. Hopefully, I don't know if you can see them or not, but you'll be able to hear them in just a moment once we start up here. So give me a second to scroll back to the top, and here it is. There we are. No problem so far, right? Just a little bit of canonical structure there, imitation, fairly easygoing. Listen a little bit further. There you go. You'll be happy to know that it does resolve in C major at the end of the piece there. But I'll keep moving for now here. So you get a sense for there. Ulysses' music was highly intellectual, highly difficult, which is why you don't hear many of his pieces performed these days. Here's a little excerpt from my friend Marquez Garrett that I referred to earlier, another one of his works, just a short snippet of Oh, Praise the Lord.
Oh, praise the Lord, all ye nations. Praise him, all ye people. Oh, praise the Lord. Oh, praise the Lord, all ye nations. Praise him, all ye nations. Praise the Lord, all ye nations. Praise him, all ye nations.
So again, something that our church choirs could do, our community choirs could do, right? It's in our love language for many of us there. The use of rhythm, the use of imitation, and the interesting use of harmony as well. So Ulysses K is someone that I really encourage you to look into. That Alleluia that I played comes from a choral triptych. So there's 3 pieces there, and they are also accompanied by strings. You can rent the string parts, and they're really fun. So let's skip ahead to this composer is one who should be known more. He has a great first name, George. That's my first name, so that's why I said that. But George Walker was a genius, and he was a trailblazer. Look at all those first there. I listed 5 first, and there are probably more. And you probably have never heard of George Walker, right? I was that way too until a few years ago. And I can honestly say I have not performed any George Walker. We actually ordered a piece to do on this year's Witness concert, but because the music had not been ordered in so long, it didn't get here in time. It took them like 8 weeks just to process our order. So we have it for a future year. George really paved the way in education, paved the way also in being acknowledged for work as a composer, both choral music as well as instrumental music. His music is characterized by highly rhythmic and energetic episodes, so to speak. So here's 2 of his psalm settings. Listen to the intensity with which the Morgan State University Choir sings. That's one of our historically Black colleges in Virginia.
Sing unto the Lord. This is
And sorry, there's no good place to stop until the end. I get exhausted just listening to that, and I love that piece. That was the one that we were going to do. The thing about George Walker's music, you could probably hear it, highly syncopated, lots of changing meters, bitonal writing there. But then he can also weave in at times, drop a little lick from a spiritual, or in a popular style, one of those motives just kind of makes you go, wait a second, that's not what I expected to hear. Just brilliant writing. Let me play a little clip of the Psalm 117. Notice these are Psalms that we use, those of you church musician, these come up in the lectionary all the time. So we could take excerpts of this with our chamber choirs.
Sing unto the Lord, praise the Lord, praise the Lord, all ye nations. Oh, praise the Lord, all ye nations. Oh, praise the Lord, praise the Lord.
So that gives us a nice spot there to stop. So what you should know, in the Black church, there is a rich tradition of anthems that were written by Black composers that aren't even in the mainstream. Like, I don't have time to cover many of those composers. Another time we could have that conversation. They wrote exclusively for Black churches, for Black church choirs, to sing pieces that were not gospel, that were not spirituals. One of the things you may not know is that there was a deep divide in a lot of churches around the time that I was growing up through high school in the 90s, the 80s, even earlier, that when I was in elementary school, you would go to a Black church and they would have segregated choirs. And what I mean by that is you would have the inspirational choir, and that's the choir that would sing the gospel music. And then you would have the choir number one. A lot of them were numbered, choir number one, choir number two, and they would focus either on spirituals and hymns or on the anthems. And I remember that very vividly because my dad would sing in like three different choirs. He sang in the men's chorus, the male ensemble. He would sing in inspirational choir number 3 and then choir number 1. And they each rehearsed a different night of the week. And they would not cross over in repertoire. So it's just a fascinating thing about our culture. It's shifted now a little bit, but it's interesting that for many years, the Black church experience did have a little bit of all of this type of choral music happening on our Sunday morning experiences and Sunday morning services. We're going to transition now to someone who has a connection to us. Undine Smith Moore is considered the dean of Black women composers. You'll notice her birth date is the earliest of anyone on the list other than Garcia Nunez. Born in Virginia, trained as a classical pianist, but the majority of her work was with vocal music. And she was really highly regarded as an educator. She taught in the public schools of North Carolina. She taught at Virginia State College, which is now a university as well. She did so much work as far as building educators, building musicians. She also became a visiting professor at, wait for it, Carleton College and College of St. Benedict as well, which is why her daughter, Mary Moore Easter, is still here in the area. Many of you know that name, Mary Moore Easter. She is a local poet, dancer, wonderful human being, and is the daughter of Undine Smith Moore. You'll notice she is the first Black person to receive a doctorate from the Eastman School of Music. So I wanted to share 2 examples of Undine's music. The first would be considered non-idiomatic. She takes the text of Langston Hughes and uses onomatopoeia to make the words come to life. This is Tambourines to the Glory of God.
Tambourines, tambourines, tambourines to the glory of God.
it, right? 1 minute, short and sweet, but you hear the way she uses the T, and it's like, I could show you the score, but I didn't have time to put it in. Each entrance is a 16th note before the beat. So it's the most interesting piece to teach. It's in 2/4, but you almost have to conduct it in 4/8 just to get them in. So you're mixing back and forth between the sub beat and the big beat just to keep it lined up rhythmically. But her whole concept there was to use that slightly offset rhythm to make it feel like you're playing the tambourine, which I love that. This next one is very different. This is her take on a Negro spiritual. We shall walk in the valley in peace, but notice how it has great lyricism, and it does have that word peace in the way she said it. And again, I wish I could let you listen to the whole thing, but you can find that on YouTube, that version. The reason I wanted to share that particular version of We Shall Walk Through the Valley is to show how when a skilled composer understands the tradition of the spiritual, understands that there are different types of spirituals. There's Jubilee songs, there's celebratory, there's sorrow songs. They all come from a deep place of emotional expression, right? Because these are people who were enslaved on the outside, but were free on the inside, and knew that there would be a better day both here on earth as well as in some form of an afterlife. And we know that they adopted that those religious beliefs from the plantation owners who brought in these missionaries to preach to them. These were not their beliefs, but what they found hope in was these Old Testament stories of liberation, the Joshua stories, the Elijah stories, right? They heard about people breaking down walls and setting things on fire and getting away and getting out of the belly of the whale. And they're like, I like that. I understand that. I resonate with that. And so when a composer understands the complete framework behind the spiritual expression, even if they're coming from a classical standpoint, even if they're not Black, and this is important that you hear this from me, even if they're not Black, they can do justice and honor to our legacy and write a beautiful arrangement. So when I look for spirituals, I'm not just looking for Black composers. I do start there because I think most of the time that's going to work out well. Not always, but most of the time. But when I look for the spiritual, I look to see that the music really reflects an understanding of the experience of the people, and that it honors the tradition and it honors the context for that song. And what I love about Undine's setting of We Shall Walk Through the Valley is it is steeped in phrase, symmetry, beautiful lyricism, excellent, exquisite part writing, very singable for high school students, for adults of all experience levels. And so there's a lot of that out there when you do some deep digging from Black composers. You'll find some gems that you can use in a variety of settings. Even if you're not a choir director on this call and you just like to listen to music, this is my call to you to start digging around and looking at some of these composers and other composers of color to see what you can unearth. You may find new things for your playlist. So I'm going to transition to our last composer for the night, That's Joel Thompson. Joel's a friend of mine, a fellow Georgia boy. Uh, Look at how young he is. If I were an envious person, I'd be envious of all that he has done being born in 1988. Such a fabulous human being. We had him here in residence this year for our witness program. Currently pursuing his DMA in composition at the Yale University School of Music. He's most known for his 7 Last Words of the Unarmed. Most of you have heard about that piece. It was written using the last words of several Black men who were killed between 1999 and 2017. That piece has come back into the forefront with everything happening in our society today. And he has even revoiced it now. It was originally for tenor bass choir. He has revoiced it for soprano, alto, tenor bass. So I suspect we'll hear more of that work very soon. We had Joel, I commissioned him to write an arrangement of who will be a witness for Vocal Essence. And I'll come back to that and share that in a little bit, because if I click this link, you won't see my screen. What I wanted to share with you tonight, though, is talking about Joel to show how composers now, our young Black composers, are really not concerned about genre as much. We are mixing genres intentionally. We are blending and merging genres together, which is really enhancing our choral tradition. So this first piece on the left, The Caged Bird Sings for Freedom, comes from Maya Angelou's poetry. He uses the clarinet as the caged bird. You can hear it in the music there. Just take a listen. I'll skip through it some as well. You'll see the score scrolling. So that was the introduction with a free bird lifting and daring to dip its wings in orange sun rays. Let me skip ahead a little bit to the clarinet coming in. This is when he says, and dares to sing. So that's the bird beginning to try to open its mouth to sing a little bit. Skip just a little bit ahead. We're going to be done in about 5 minutes, just to let you know here. Makes the sky his own, but the caged bird stands on the grave of dreams. Listen to this motive here. So we had the privilege of performing this piece this year, only the third group to perform it. It's 7 minutes long. It's one of the most challenging pieces to really get on the inside of and bring to life and to sing. And Nathan's in the room, and Nathan sang in that choir. He understands what I'm talking about. But what I wanted you to recognize is Joel has his own motive. Just like Bach had a motif for things, Joel has a dream deferred motif. Dee, 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 dee. When you look at this next piece, which I'll play a little excerpt of Hold Fast to Dreams, the same motif comes in.
Free at last, free at last.
And here's the motive.
What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry or fester like a stolen Does it stink like rotten meat? Oh, cross and still be Maybe it's just as like a heavy or does it explode?
And I have to stop there to honor our time, but you can find that one on YouTube. I wanted you to hear that theme to get a sense of conclusion, and also to say to all of us, let's hold fast to our dreams. Some resources here for you. There are many out there. These are just a few things that you can find on the internet. So if you come back to this video, you can just scroll to the end and find these resources. I can also share these with Amanda. These are just some simple things where you can discover more composers. The first link there talks about 7 composers in various genres and various idioms of writing, music writing. The second is about art songs. Daryl Taylor is the founder of the African American Art Song Alliance, so you can learn a lot about African American art songs. Chevalier St. George's is the one whom I consider Mozart might have looked to him for some of his work. He was an instrumental and operatic composer. And then Marcus Garrett, whom I've talked to before, did his dissertation on non-idiomatic Black composers and their music. So I've enjoyed spending this time with you, and I hope it's been what we said it would be, Hearing Soul. I just thought, since that was the title, let's just listen a lot and muse a little bit, and hopefully you found some composers that you didn't know about, and you can go back and do some more listening on your own, and just keep spreading the gospel of we need to diversify our musical offerings, not for the sake of diversifying, for the sake of providing our ears and our souls with a richer expression. You know, if you're in the church music world, we certainly want to hear the praise from people around the world, right? Because God's praises abound. If you're in the community world, we want the music that we sing to be representative of those who might be hearing us so that they can see themselves and hear themselves in the story and feel more connected to the music that we present. So I'm glad to be with you. I'm happy to stay, but like I said, I do want to honor the fact that this was the time we said, but I can hang on if anybody wants to chat, ask questions, stuff like that.
Yeah, let's just say thank you overall to Philip. Philip, this has just been I can't believe how much you packed into this hour, and it didn't feel rushed or anything. It just felt like very rich, and I think everyone learned a lot from the opening. Like, what do you hear? What composers do you think this might be? I know my mind was showing my biases of like, oh, this sounds like something a Lutheran college choir would sing, or that like reminds me of Mendelssohn opening, and then seeing like, nope, these are all Black composers, and just kind of breaking some of the stereotypes we have. So really appreciate getting us quickly into some deep thought. I'll ask you for your PowerPoint so we can pass
Mm-hmm.
that around as well. And just to, I think if people do want to stick around and ask some questions, that's awesome. Do want to invite you back next week if you have to go, and bring a friend with you. Make sure they register so that we can just kind of keep track of how many people are coming through. So thank you, Philip. If you need to leave, no problem at all. And if you want to stick around, you can ask questions either aloud or in the chat.